What's up YouTube? This is John Helm with Helm Woodshop and Smithy, back with another knife making video. Today is going to be the first installment in an ongoing series that I will be dropping in here and there when the weather's bad or on a day like today where I'm still waiting on my 2x72 grinding belts to show up in the mail. And I'll give you some tips and tricks, some of the soft skills, maybe a small project as an example piece, so that you can learn how to do the things that you need to do to get what you need to get done in the shop. Today we're going to be talking about every blacksmith's #1 tool, the hammer. Because let's face it, man, if you don't have a hammer, you ain't a blacksmith, son. If you walk into any blacksmith shop, you're going to see a big rack with a whole bunch of hammers on it. They're all going to be different sizes, different shapes, different weights. Most of them probably dilapidated and covered in rust, not unlike these. But off of that rack, there are probably only 2, maybe 3 hammers that the blacksmith uses on a regular basis. Off of my rack, these are the 2 hammers that I use more than anything else. One's a cross peen with a rounding face, and one has a rounding face and a planishing face. What is so special about these hammers? Nothing really. I picked them both up off the rack from Harmful Fright. I think they're about $8 or $10 a piece. They do, however, accomplish the function that I need them to, but they didn't right off of the rack. I had to make them that way. So in order to really understand why they accomplish what I need better than they did when I bought them, we need to look at a hammer that looks like these did, straight from the store. This is a 3-pound engineer's hammer, sledgehammer, that I bought for $7.99. It features a 16-inch hardwood handle. What kind of wood is it? Hard. It also features a random rubber band that's stuck around it for no apparent reason, and a sticker for you to spend 20 minutes attempting to remove. A closer look at the handle reveals that it does not have a straight grain. In fact, the grain travels at around 45 degrees from one side of the hammer to the other. This is bad. A couple good whacks on an anvil and it could easily crack, causing a potentially harmful accident. The shape of the handle shows that it is basically a variation of what you would see on a cheap claw hammer from Walmart, like the Stanley that I have here, which I think only cost $5. At the top, it tapers down and gets very thin. This one actually gets thinner than the 1-pound claw hammer. There's a palm swell about halfway down. It tapers down just a baby hair more, and then there's another little tiny swell at the base. And we can see that both faces of this hammer are ground perfectly flat, and the edges are tapered off, leaving 2 sharp edges. A straight-on view from the side reveals that neither of these faces, while being perfectly flat, are square to the top and the bottom of the hammer. They're both off canter. I would say probably about 2 to 3 degrees on either side, but in opposite directions. And here is my old trusty. I love this hammer. As you can see, the handle is straight all the way from the top to the bottom. It has a slight outward taper in either direction towards the base to work as a wedge and help keep it in your hand. We can also see that this handle is wide in this dimension and narrow in this dimension. This is very important so that it indexes well in your hand, so that you can bring it down nice and flat every time you swing it. Let's take a look at the head of this hammer. As we can see, it has 2 faces, just like the other one, but these faces are not the same. Not all blacksmithing hammers have 2 faces, but when they do, one generally serves a purpose to move the metal faster, while the other one serves a purpose of smoothing the metal out and giving a nice finish, as you can see on this cross peen hammer. The cross peening side of the hammer has a very small surface area. This increases PSI when you strike your workpiece and helps move the metal faster. The cross peen also serves to help you choose which direction in which to move the metal. It will only move the metal up and down across the cross peen instead of spreading it out into a sheet. And as we saw on my other hammer, this planishing face is ground perfectly flat with nice rounded edges to prevent you from marring your steel. The rounding face of this hammer also helps move metal more quickly by decreasing the area of contact and subsequently increasing the pounds per square inch. However, a rounding face doesn't move the metal unidirectionally like a cross peen. It will move the metal equally in all directions. Now, what am I going to do to this new hammer to turn it into an amazing and sexy piece of metal forgery? Well, before we can talk about that, we need to understand why I'm doing it, so we need to talk about functionality. This hammer is designed and would function okay for whacking stuff, and that's about it. The caliper stuck on the rotor, whack it. You need to tear down a wall, whack it. This will get the job done, but it's not going to work very well for a blacksmith. While most hammers off the shelf are just a chunk of metal stuck to a stick, a blacksmith's hammer is actually a stamp. Every time you strike a piece of metal, you aren't just whacking it, you're imparting the shape of the face of the hammer onto the workpiece. So just like a clay sculptor will have different shaped tools to change the shape of the clay, a blacksmith has to have different shaped hammers to change the shape of their metal. So now the fun stuff. What are we going to do to this thing? Well, first, I need to go here and grind these faces down to a shape that's more conducive to blacksmithing. The first one here is going to be a planishing face. I like them a little bit on the rounded side because I don't have perfect hammer control like some more experienced smiths. And this face will become a straight peen. It's just like a cross peen with the peening edge turned 90 degrees. I will also be removing this crooked grained piece of mystery wood with a coat of lacquer on it. It looks like it was applied by a toddler with a sponge brush. And I will be replacing it with a nice straight grained piece of red oak that is easy to index and won't leave hot spots and blisters on your hands after a long day of whacking stuff. Some of y'all might be like, but John, can't you just buy a hammer that's already really cool? And I mean, yeah, you can, but you're gonna pay for it. They don't give those suckers away. It's probably gonna be over $100. I had a buddy bring over a specific blacksmithing hammer that he had bought, and it was gorgeous. It was a beautiful hammer, but I didn't really like how it felt in my hand. It had a big palm swell, just like this handle does, and that tells you where you can hold the handle and be comfortable. It also means that it's inevitably gonna be skinny up top, and a really skinny handle that's too small for your hand, nothing is gonna tire your hand out faster than that. Also, up here where it's skinny, it's also inevitably going to have poor indexing, and it's going to be weaker, so it's going to be more likely to break. And if it doesn't index correctly, choking up on it to get better hammer control isn't going to do you as much good as it could otherwise. But that is enough babbling for one day. I'm sure you all are sick of hearing me talk. I know I am, so let's go to the shop. Here it is, straight off the belt grinder. I took it up to a 120 grit belt, so it has a nice smooth finish on it. Doesn't have any deep scratches that would mark a workpiece that you're forging. Normally this would be good enough to start using, but for the sake of the video, I'm gonna make it perfect. So I'm gonna take a file to it. I started the filing with a large bastard file that has a little bit more of an aggressive tooth on it. And it does remove metal pretty quickly, but it leaves a nasty finish. So now I'm going back with a finer tooth file and I'm just cleaning it up, refining the shape. This file happens to be a Velourbe Voltitan. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. It's a Swiss file. Got it on Amazon. It's a little bit pricey, but if you can swing it, get some of these files. They make everything so much easier. It files just about everything. It doesn't get clogged up very easily. It is just tearing apart this hardened steel on the hammerhead. You can even file a hardened knife blade with them. They're really incredible. I'll leave a link in the description. That went swimmingly. The rounding face is exactly how I want it. So now I'm ready to move on to the straight peen. Before I start cutting, it's important to mark off exactly where I want to take the metal off to make this straight peen. Now I want the face to be a little bit on the wide side, a little bit wider than a 1/2 inch I'd say, because on my cross peen I have a much more aggressive taper. And I find that sometimes it just goes a little bit too deep into the metal, it's harder to control. And I've been meaning to grind that down for a while, I just haven't gotten around to it. Another reason I want to have a wide face on this is because this is a 3-pound hammerhead. I don't want it to get much lighter than that. I usually forge with a 3 to a 4-pound hammer, and this is probably going to wind up being about 2.5. So what I'll do here is mark off this wide face. And then we will rough in the taper towards the outside. So that all these lines are the same on all 4 corners, I'm going to use the tip of this straight line I just drew on the face and do as best I can to get a straight line to this little notch. I think that'll be just about right. It won't be perfect, but that's okay because we can fix it after we cut it on the grinder. The lines I drew with the Sharpie are hard to see, so I'm going to scratch them in with this pointed punch. And we're ready to cut. Here's what we have after cutting. There's just a taper cut off each side, giving us that straight peen. Here you can see it with a 40 grit finish. It's looking a little bit rough, but you can see where I'm headed. Now, I know most people would take this back to the grinder with a finer grit belt and refine the finish and the shape, but I have different plans for this one. Now, I love a good file finish on anything. I think it is beautiful. It shows that someone actually worked on it with their hands and it wasn't made in China like everything else that we buy here in America, especially from places like Walmart and Harbor Freight. But more importantly than those things, it's incredibly tactile. It feels good in your hands. And I know you don't grip the head of a hammer, but it is a tool. You're gonna be using it and touching it all the time. So I want it to feel really nice. So we're gonna take this over to the vise and I'm gonna spend an inordinate amount of time putting a file finish on this hammerhead. Now I had to switch to a bigger file. I really like that little file I was using. It's that Velour Bay Valtitan I was telling y'all about. But it's just so small. That was a lot of filing, and my hands are feeling tired and roughed up from the files themselves, but this thing is looking nice. I like it. Now all we have to do is put a handle on her. As you get closer to fitting this hammerhead onto the handle, I like to jam it on there real good and then see where I left a mark. And then just below that mark, I'll file it down until the mark is almost no longer visible. Got to do it on both sides, can't just do it on one. And if you don't have one of these tools, it's called a shinto rasp. And if you do any amount of knife making or making handles for hammers, I would definitely recommend getting one of these. They're cheap, they last a long time, and they remove wood really fast. Super handy to have around. And I just continue this process until I have a nice snug fit. And it goes all the way down to the shoulder. If you take a look down inside this eye hole, you can see that there is a weird ridge of metal that protrudes from the inside. So I had to accommodate for that when I was carving the handle, so you can see this here, because I didn't want to leave an empty pocket of air where there was no contact between the hammerhead and the handle. That just seems like an easy way to break the head off. But it fits on nice and snug. There is a tiny little gap, which is good because when I pound it on and then I drive the wedge in, it'll drive it down a little bit further on the handle and it should be nice and flush. So I can go ahead and start shaping the handle. If you're going to be using bladed tools like spoke shaves or hand planes to shape your handle, make sure you pay attention to which direction the wood likes to be cut. Especially on this piece of red oak, it's very splintery with bladed tools. So when I was coming down, I was tearing out chunks. You don't want to do that. Then you have to go back in the opposite direction, clean them all up. And they can be bad enough that it could ruin a handle if it's thick enough. So just be careful. I'm getting close. Okay, it's just about all sanded. Took it down to 220 grit, so it should have nice smooth finish. This piece of wood is looking beautiful. One thing to consider when you're going to rehandle a hammer is what type of wood to use. The most popular wood to use is hickory. That's what you see most frequently. But I really prefer red oak. A lot of people are skeptical of it. They say it's not going to hold up, but I've been using hammers with red oak handles on them for years, and I've never had an issue with it at all. I've never had a handle break, never had to crack. In use, anyway. I've broken them and cracked them while I was trying to put them on the hammer. Hopefully that's not how it goes today. Here she is, a tool worthy of a craftsman. Cost me $8 and the crap I had laying around in the garage. Not a bad deal at all. Making this new video was a blast. Plus, I got a new hammer out of the deal, so that's pretty sweet. I hope y'all enjoyed it. This is the first video I've shot with my new video camera, so hopefully you can tell that the video quality is much higher. I'm trying to improve the production of these videos as I go forward, but it's a steep learning curve, man. It's just as much to learn as there is in blacksmithing. It's a whole craft in its own. But hopefully I'll slowly, incrementally make improvements and I'll eventually get there. Next up, I'm probably gonna try to get some better lighting and set up the shop so that it's more conducive to videoing me work. Right now all my benches are pushed up against the wall, so when I'm working, if you walk in the room, the only thing you can see is my back. So I'm gonna have to rearrange some things. No biggie, it can be done. If y'all have any comments on what I could do, any resources that you think I should look up, please drop them in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Have a good one.